I'm Gabriel Udio, and I'm a data analyst at Data Playground. This video would be introducing you to what data analysis actually is. We'll be walking through outlines from my book, The Complete Data Analyst. So, I want you to imagine something with me. It's a Monday morning, say 9 a.m., and it's your first week as a junior data analyst at a company which would want to call TradeFlow. Um, TradeFlow is an e-commerce and logistics company which operates across Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, and Rwanda. And so you've been working towards this moment for a while. You're excited, maybe a little nervous too. So both of those feelings are completely normal. You barely sit down before your manager. Maybe you can call her Amina. So she appears at your desk that Monday morning. No small talk. She just turns up her laptop towards you, points at the screen and says, "Oh, we processed over 10,000 orders last quarter." She says revenue is up, but profits are down. So nobody knows why. And she says, "I need to figure this out by Thursday," and just walks away. So you're staring at a spreadsheet now. You have thousands of rows in front of you, columns going in every direction. You have numbers, you have dates, you have names, you have statuses, you have amounts, all just sitting there completely. You know, the numbers aren't telling you anything immediately, but they are waiting for you to make sense out of all of them. And here's what I want you to notice about that moment. The first thought in your head is probably not which formula do I need. It's not should I use SQL or Python for this. It's something much simpler than that. It's just what's actually going on here. Now, that question right there is where data analysis begins. Data analysis does not begin in a tool, it doesn't begin in a formula, it doesn't even begin in the data itself. Data analysis begins in your head, in the way you think before you touch anything. So, this whole chapter, this whole video is about that moment. And by the end of this video, I promise you, you'd never approach a data problem the same way again. So, why are we having this video? One of the things I've seen happen to a lot of people who learn data analysis is that most people learn it backwards. Most people love to start with tools, they spend weeks on spreadsheets, shortcuts, SQL, or as some will call it, SQL syntax, Python commands, all genuinely are very useful. But one of the things that most people do not do is they never stop to ask what they are actually trying to do with those tools. So what happens? People are able to write formulas, but they can't explain, the business question that those formulas actually answers. People can run a query, but they can't tie it to a real decision. They just build reports that sit in someone's inbox, unopened because the report was never connected to anything the reader actually needed. So I don't want that to happen to you. And that's why this video exists, to build the right foundation before we touch even a single tool. And so we are going to talk about what data analysis actually is, the real version, not the ones we see in textbook. And we are going to look at how data creates value and why it so often doesn't. Everything else from here on, every query, every script, every dashboard is going to sit on top of what we are going to learn right now in this video. So what does a data analyst actually do? Now, when most people hear data analysis, they picture someone in a dark room, someone who is surrounded by screens, someone running calculations nobody else understands. But that mental picture is, let me say, can be quite misleading. It can be wrong to an extent. So, a data analyst is someone who helps people make better decisions. That's the whole job, right? You just help people make better decisions. Everything else you see, the spreadsheet, SQL, the Python, the beautiful dashboards, those are just tools you use to do that one thing, which is decision making. They are not the job, they are how you do the job. So if we think back to the manager's problem, Amina's problem, when she said revenue was up but profits were down, that's more of a decision problem. Someone at the company trade flow needs to decide what to do about it. Or maybe costs are climbing in one region. Maybe a product's category is quietly dragging margins down. Maybe there's a logistics inefficiency that no one's spotted yet. but they can't decide well without first understanding what's actually happening. And that's where you come in. Your job is not to produce charts that look impressive in a meeting. Your job is to reduce uncertainty so someone else can act with confidence. The charts are just how you show your work, right? So here's something I wanted to say. You can say like a data analyst is someone who turns confusion into clarity so that decisions can be made. Every time you feel lost in the middle of a messy analysis, come back to that sentence and it would actually help to reorient you. So let's look at data versus information versus insight. What's the comparison within this? This idea actually sounds, almost too simple to bother, trying to explain it. But understanding it will, change the way you work in a very real and a very practical way. So these three words, data, information, and insights, most of the time they get used interchangeably everywhere, even by experienced people, but they are not the same thing. Data itself is raw. Data is just recorded facts. It's a number in a cell. It's a date in a column. It's a delivery status that says field. On its own, data means nothing. It just exists. So, like, you can think of data like raw ingredients on a kitchen counter. On a kitchen counter, you could have things like you'd have tomatoes, you'd have onions, you'd have pepper, you'd have stock cubes, you'd have palm oil. They are all there, but nobody is eating yet because ingredients sitting on a counter do not feed anyone. So, what then is information? Information is what happens when you organize or summarize that data so it's easier to understand. For example, if you decide to look at TradeFlow's 10,000 orders and calculate that 23% were delivered late, that's information. The raw numbers didn't give you that until you had to perform, you had to make it undergo a process to give you something meaningful. So you've taken raw facts and structured them, and that's progress. But it's still not enough. Because knowing 23% of others are late doesn't tell anyone what to do about it, and that's where insights come in. Insight is what happens when information answers a specific question in a way that leads to action. If you discover that 20% figure, but in the southwest zone it's 41%, and that zone covers let's say TradeFlow's three largest corporate clients, that's an insight. That's something someone can act on today. You've given them something they can use to make a decision. So the chain looks like this. It's like first you have data, and then you have information, and then you have insights, you have then decision, you have action. So that chain is what data analysis is about. And so every skill you build in this video is about moving things along this chain from the data to information to insight to decision and to action. So at TradeFlow, operations, would get a daily delivery file every morning and thousands of rows. That's why you are looking at is data. The analyst would open it, the analyst would calculate delivery success rates by region and build a clean summary. That clean summary built is information. And then the analyst, notice something nobody asked them to look for. For example, one courier partner in Kenya has a failure rate that could be maybe three times higher than every other partner, and it's been that way for 6 straight weeks. Now that's insight. The operations manager would see it and be able to act immediately, probably suspend that courier or redistribute their deliveries. The following month, performance in Kenya would improve noticeably. Now, the analyst himself did not make the decision. That was not their job. But without the analyst, that decision would never get made. The at least not at the right time. So this is exactly what we have here. You have you have daily delivery file, you have an analyst building a clean success rate summary by region, and then you have the insights one Kenyan courier partner could have three times the failure rate. That's for 6 weeks running, and then decisions are made, and those decisions that are made help to impact the business. So you can pause and try this yourself. Think of an organization, maybe a school you know well, could be a shop, could be a school, could be a clinic, anywhere you've worked before. What do you think are the decisions that that organization might make regularly, maybe daily, maybe weekly, and maybe bigger, strategic ones? What data might already exist that could support those decisions, and what would actually act on the insights? You could name the role. So I want you to take a moment to try this on your own while we proceed. Now let's look at another very interesting concept where people miss out on: the analyst against the scientist and then the engineer. This is actually used interchangeably, and it brings a lot of confusion, makes people feel lost about what to actually focus on. But I'll try to break it down as simply as I can. A data analyst asks what is happening and why. You take existing data, you clean it, you exploit, you summarize it, you visualize it, and you communicate what it means. You are the most common person. You are most immediately needed data role in the industry, and that's exactly what this video is going to prepare you to be. Now, the data scientist, on the other hand, he asks what is likely to happen next. A data scientist tries to build predictive models, runs experiments, applies advanced statistics. Data science almost always builds on top of what an analyst has already done. And now the data engineer lastly asks, how do we reliably collect, store, and move data? A data engineer's job is to build the pipelines and systems that make data available in the first place. So here's an analogy that could actually help stick. Um, for example, for example, um, imagine this. Imagine this. Let's say we have a hospital. The data engineer builds and maintains patients' record system, right? Every visit, every diagnosis and prescription captured, and um, you know, and it makes them accessible. Now, the data analyst looks at those records and tell the administrator, our emergency department waiting times increased 40% since March. The main cause looked like understaffing on Tuesday evening shift specifically. That's someone trying to give insight from data available, which actually help in decision making. Now, the data scientist now goes further and builds a model predicting which days over the next month will be most crowded so staffing can adjust in advance. Now, we have three different questions, we have three different jobs. All these are valuable, all are connected, and you are starting at the analyst level, which is genuinely the right place to start. Every organization needs analysts more urgently and more consistently than almost any other data role. So, how does data create value? How does data really create value? Now, here's something that surprised me when I first learned this, and it might surprise you too. Truth is, organizations do not pay analysts to produce charts. That's not your job. You're not being paid to produce charts. They don't even pay you to find interesting patterns. They pay you as an analyst because your good analysis would actually lead to better decisions, and better decisions save money, better decisions make money, or better decisions reduce risk. And that's the entire business case for hiring you. Think about TradeFlow. If the company is spending 30% more on last mile delivery than it needs to because one road is deeply inefficient, that's money leaving the business every day quietly and invisibly. That's money right there, always leaving. Nobody traces it, but it lives every day. It lives quietly. It lives, invisible, untraced. Now, an analyst who finds that number and puts a number on it, he says something like, "We are losing roughly 3.8 million naira a month on the Lagos Ibadan corridor due to routing inefficiently." inefficiency. That analyst has just created enormous value, not by building anything flashy, by seeing what was already there and making it impossible to ignore. And that's your job as an analyst. So I want you to carry this with you. The most valuable analysts aren't always the most technically skilled ones. They are the ones who understand the business, they are the ones who ask the right questions, and they communicate findings in a way that actually drives action. Now, of course, the technical skills matter. Yes, you build serious ones in later videos, but never lose sight of what those skills are in service of. Those technical skills you are going to build, they are in service of decision making, right? So let's look at the analyst workflow. Every serious piece of analysis follows a process. It might look slightly different from companies to companies, but the underlying logic is always the same. So let me walk you through this in the way that it actually happens. Now, the first thing you should do as an analyst is to understand the problem. Before you open any data, before you pick up a tool, understand what decisions need to be made. Who is asking? What are they trying to do? What would they do differently with the answer which you give them? This is the step that most beginners skip, and it's the most expensive mistake in this field, because you ask the wrong question, you carry out the wrong analysis. So you can spend hours doing the wrong thing with complete technical correctness. You have the technical knowledge and everything, and you apply your technical skills properly, but because you refuse to ask the right questions, you end up at the wrong result. Now, the second thing is to define what success looks like. You need to agree with yourself and ideally with whoever asks on how you know that you found something useful. The third thing is to identify and understand your data. You look at the data set and you ask yourself, what does this contain? What does each column mean in the real world? What might be missing or wrong? Do not ever assume that data is clean. Always try to exploit first. Always exploit. Now, the fourth thing is to clean and prepare your data. Now, in most real world cases, data is often messy, it's often unclean. You could have missing values, duplicates, inconsistent formatting, impossible numbers. Not necessarily glamorous work, but analysis is built on dirty data. Or let me say, analysis most often times starts from dirty data. Now, if you do not clean your data, you are likely to have the wrong answers, and wrong answers are even worse than having no answer at all, because people act on them. The answers you give your stakeholders, they are likely to act on it. So it's even better if you do not have an answer than you even give them a wrong answer. Now, the next thing is to, as after cleaning your data, analyze and explore your data. This is the actual work here. No, cleaning and preparing it is a whole lot of work, but then analyzing and exploring your data, you apply a lot of your technical knowledge here. Um, you have to identify patterns, trends, outliers, relationships. This is where you make use of your spreadsheets, like your Google Sheets, your Microsoft Excel. You also make use of SQL. You make use of, in some cases, you might decide to make use of Python, and this is where most of the technical work actually happens. Now, the next thing after your analysis and exploration of data is to generate insights. Now, for example, what is an insight? An example of an insight can be sales dropped in March, right? This is a finding. Like if you say sales dropped in March, that's a finding. Now, if you say sales dropped in March specifically in electronics because our top selling item went out of stock in 3 countries at once, and we have no early warning systems for stock out, that's an insight there. One sentence just changes everything, gives a new perspective. But the initial sentence I said just floats there, saying sales dropped in March. Okay, how, what, why, what went wrong? But the second sentence went deeper, to give explanations about this, and that's the sentence that actually changes something. That's insight there. Now, the last thing is to communicate and support the decision. Analysis doesn't end when you find the answer, it ends when someone acts on it. A brilliant insight nobody believes or acts on is wasted, no matter how rigorous the work is behind it, right? So, for example, a product manager at TradeFlow noticed electronics sales have been flat in, let's say, for 2 months despite a heavy marketing push. So she messaged the analytics team and says, can you look into this? Now a junior analyst who has not internalized the workflow would naturally open the sales data immediately. Maybe 2 hours later they send back a table of monthly revenue. The monthly revenue is technically accurate, but it could be completely useless for the actual decision. But a more experienced analyst would pause first and ask, what decisions are you trying to make? Right? It's going to change. Are you trying to change the campaign? Are you trying to adjust the lineup, or is this something else? And then she has to reply, we are deciding whether to renew our marketing agency contract, which expires in 2 weeks. Now the analyst knows exactly what to look for, and the outputs becomes a clear relevance recommendation, not just a table. Now, of course, they were given the same data, they had the same tools to work with, but then they produced completely different results because one analyst took 30 seconds to understand the problem first. Now, here's the mental shift that changes everything. So, there's a way beginners think about data work and a way analysts think about it. The gap isn't about skill or experience, it's about where your attention goes first. As a beginner will most likely say, what formula do I need? What function should I use? How should I write this query? But an analyst would say, what decision needs to be made? What question does this data need to answer? What will change if I found what I'm looking for? Now, this shift from thinking about tools first to thinking about the decisions first, it changes what you work on, it changes how long you spend on your data analysis process in, and it also changes how useful your output will turn out to be, right? So is this thinking, or this way of thinking, is actually a habit that needs to be built deliberately. Every time someone asks you to do something with data, before you open anything, ask yourself, what decision is this in service of? Who needs to act on the answer? What would they do differently if I found something meaningful? Now, if you can't answer those questions, um if you can't answer those questions by yourself, you need to ask the person coming to you with the data before you even start the analysis. Sometimes it might feel uncomfortable, like it makes you look unsure, but the opposite is actually true. It's the opposite case, because analysts who ask these questions earn trust early enough because their work is always uh, relevant. So this is exactly what you have here, right? Okay. So um you're going to have a mini project right now. It can be something I will attach my mail at the end of this video. You find it in the description, or the mail for data playground. You can mail your answers and I'll try to respond to as many as I can respond to. You really don't need any tool for this particular project. You don't need spreadsheets, you don't need any code, you just need your thinking. So here's the scenario. Now, it's your first week at TradeFlow. Your manager tells you that customer complaints are up 35% over the last 2 months, and leadership is genuinely concerned. And she says you should look into it. Now, before touching any data, I want you to do this. You're going to write a short problem framing document, just 1 page, and it should contain 4 things. The first thing is the decision. What is the leadership ultimately trying to decide? Not understand the complaint, that's a task. Understanding the complaint is a task, not a decision. A decision is something they would actually do differently based on what you find. Now your second question is this: write at least 5 specific analytical questions that, if answered, could help give the leadership what they need. Try to make them specific, not why are complaints up, but something like which product categories are generating the most complaints, and has that proportion changed over the past 2 months. That's more of a specific question there. Now the third thing you're going to try to do is the data you need. Now, for each question, what data would help you answer it? That data doesn't need to exist yet, but just think about what you want. And then the last thing is the risk. What assumptions are you going to be making here? What might be misleading or incomplete if you are not careful? And I want you to know that there's no single correct answer here. So it's entirely about the quality of your thinking. Just keep these documents. Like I said, I'll attach the mail in the description for this video. You can mail me your answers. I'll go through as many as I can. I'll try to reply, and then you will be able to, see if you are doing a great job. So, for most part of data analysis, it's most about, or is more about decisions and less about tools. Most times it's not really about the data itself. It's like I said, it's about decisions. It's helping real people in real organizations. You're helping them cut through the noise, you're helping them see clearly, you're helping them act with confidence. The chain we talked about, from data to information to insight to decision to action, that's the spine of this entire book. So every concept, every tool, every project is one more step along that chain. So at least you now understand what a data analyst does and how it's different from a data scientist and a data engineer. You understand why data only creates value when it connects to a decision, and the workflow every serious analysis follows. We started practicing the shift that changes everything: decision first and tools second. The tools are coming, don't worry. Better videos, you have the tools, to practice, and they are genuinely enjoyable to learn. But carry this chapter with you when you are deep in a SQL query later in this book and you've lost the thread of why you are doing what you do. Come back here. This video would find you again and would clarify everything that you need. So, what's coming next? In our next video, we are going to go deeper into the thinking side of this job. You now know what analysis is, but how do you actually do it well when the problem in front of you is vague, when the problem in front of you is messy, when the problem is unclear? How do you separate the symptom from the real cause? How do you turn a confused request from a manager into a focused question that data can actually answer? And that's where we are headed next. So I want you to I want you to share this video, and I want you to subscribe to this channel, Data Playground. See you in our next video. Thank you.